Hey everyone, welcome to our podcast, IR in Focus. I am your host, Carmen Lilly, and the next 20 minutes we'll take a closer look at retail investors, how they behave, and top tips for engaging with this diverse investor base. Joining me today for this discussion is Matt Joanou. Matt is the CEO and co-founder of Stakeholder Labs. Matt, it's great to have you join the podcast. You have a great background, so let me just take a moment to give our audience a few highlights from your career. Matt has over 10 years experience working with digital loyalty, community, and marketing products. Matt's career as an entrepreneur started in his Cal Poly dorm room when he helped launch a customer loyalty company called Punch, which was quickly acquired by Google. Matt later joined Reddit, where he worked alongside the founders to build out the business, which gave him a front row seat to the evolution of dynamic investor communities and their potential impact on our global financial system. So, welcome, Matt.
Thanks for having me, Carmen. Excited to chat. It's been a few weeks since we touched base last on that Neary trip to DC, so excited to dive in a little bit deeper.
Yeah, that was such a fun trip. And I sent you a note. I'm not sure you saw it, but one of the regulations that we advocated for was finally passed.
I saw that. It was fun to see the process, but also having that come through was big and really allowing more transparency in the industry and helping push more modern and innovative approach to our industry is exciting to see.
Yeah, awesome. Okay, so let's dive right in. Let's start with your thoughts on the state of the market and how this has impacted retail investor engagement.
Sure. I think we've seen markets that really have been all over the place a little bit the last few years. I think in spite of that, we've seen levels of retail participation that we've really never seen in history. There's over 100 million retail investors in the US alone, and a lot of that is driven by millennial and Gen Z investors coming online. We're seeing the average age of a retail investor drop from 48 years old to 35 years old in the last 3 years. And 49% of retail investors have invested for less than 5 years. So when you're looking specifically at the retail component of the market, it's much different than it was even 3 years ago. And I think there's a misconception that throughout the ups and downs of the last 3 years, you've seen a pullback, but we've actually seen the opposite. And we've seen retail really lean in, and they're investing in the companies that they know and love. They're looking for more information on Reddit, on Twitter, on various financial publications. And really, they're looking at how they can engage more directly with these companies. Then, more broadly, I think looking at beyond retail, you're seeing institutional investors are looking at retail for signal and for alpha. And there was a study that showed that a lot of analysts are using at Reddit, they're using Twitter, they're using various social platforms to research. And all of that is the pulse of the retail community. And so we're excited. We're working with a lot of issuers and corporations to help them build programs where they can really lean into this opportunity and engage with retail in a way that's good for both the shareholders and the company. And really our fundamental vision and mission is to align those two groups and help corporations form healthy communities of long-term shareholders in this retail base.
When I was reading about your background and what reminded me, the comment you made around institutional investors now taking signals from retail. Let's dig into that a little bit more. With your background at Reddit, could you go into more detail how Reddit was used as a platform to really coalesce a large retail base and really what you saw happen with the retail behavior?
I'll give an analogy. So when I was at Reddit, we worked with Fortune 100 companies, and part of it was through the lens of engaging those communities. But the other side of it was looking at the platform for signal. And in those days, and I'd argue still today, Reddit was the cultural epicenter of a lot of what was happening on the internet and really just in general in culture. And you'd see it hit on Reddit first, and then you'd see it on Twitter, and then you'd see it on Facebook, and then it'd be an article on BuzzFeed. And we would work with large companies like a gaming publisher, and we would help them analyze the velocity of different trends. And when there was a new Call of Duty game coming out or when there was a new FIFA game coming out, they would look at those communities in particular to understand what was happening, what was the sentiment, and how could they leverage and lean into these movements. And similarly, within the financial markets, we've seen communities on platforms like Reddit, like Twitter, really drive a lot of momentum, drive a lot of potential change. And so, by that definition, you're seeing institutional investors keep a closer eye on what's happening at the retail level. They're looking at conversation, they're looking at velocity of community, they're looking at which companies in their portfolio are being talked about next to other companies. And ultimately, everyone is using the same set of tools. So I think the beauty of this is that you're seeing a lot more democratization from a shareholder perspective, and access to data and tools is like for like, whether you're a big institutional or retail. And really having that finger on the pulse and being able to connect directly with them is something that you haven't had historically through this digital and social lens.
hmm I know typically we refer to retail investors as dumb money, right? But let's be real. Is there such a thing as dumb money or smart money given, some of the comments you gave around the abundance of information that's available and new tools and platforms that really unearths a lot of financial information and it's really at the fingertips of anyone who really wants to go looking for it?
Sure. It's a good question. And I'd agree. It's probably, or it's definitely an unfair descriptor, a subset of the market. I think in general, there's been a lot more sophistication introduced to the retail market, especially when it comes to different types of investing, how they're ingesting different forms of data. The reference, I think, has come to the cultural zeitgeist over the last few months because of the movie that came out. And the movie centered around the GameStop saga. And I will call out that the Dumb Money title was actually changed from the original book. So the original title was called The Antisocial Network. And it was a reference to the self organized communities on Reddit, on Twitter, on these different message boards that came together and really formed a movement. And this was at a time during the pandemic when people were spending a lot more time at home. They were learning how to invest and they were looking at companies that, again, they have some emotional connection to. It's no accident that a lot of the meme stocks, which it's worth calling out, there are less than a handful of meme stocks in the markets. There's a fear that companies have sometimes that they'll become one, but it's no accident that all of those companies had high levels of nostalgia. So GameStop, AMC, BlackBerry, Bed Bath and Beyond, these are all companies that particularly the millennial generation had grown up with. And so in general, when you look at the dumb money moniker and this movie that has come out recently, I think it's a misnomer. And if anything, retail sometimes is able to move faster. They're dealing with data directly and they're able to have an outsized voice relative to their position within the markets themselves. Again, this is changing, and I think that is why you are seeing institutional investors lean into the retail communities and really seek them out. We're actually starting to see issuers and their investor relations team have storylines around their retail investor communities and actually have stats and data around how their retail investor community compares to a competitor or compares to a peer within the market. But in general, I think it's a very unfair descriptor. And I think if anything, we're seeing this transparency and this level playing field like we've never seen before. And it's a good thing. It's healthy. It's competition. It's what the markets were designed to do. And the speed is really what's changed because of digital tools and neo brokerages and social media. You're seeing all of this happen very, very quickly. So, with that, I think the next generation is approaching investing in a new way.
I would also throw in there Robinhood. That app really created day trading and gamified the stock market, right? It was super engaging. It was an app and you were placing bets. Then you had this huge influx of retail money into the market just through making day trading more accessible to these folks. You also mentioned that with the meme stocks, they were more based on like nostalgia for millennials. I spent many, many hours in Bed Bath and Beyond. Don't have to go there, but
Sure.
what other sort of investment strategies, if we take away the misnomer dumb money versus smart money, are employed by retail investors?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think I will caveat retail is very broad. There are all shapes and sizes of retail investors, and they deploy different strategies. I think the cutoff is everyone below $100 million of investable capital is considered retail. But let's think about the folks who are on Robinhood, who are on Webull, who are on Public, who are on Cash App, like that type of retail investor. They're a utilizing the information that they have access to, so they can be using Reddit, Twitter, etc. Maybe they're on StockTwits. Maybe they're a little bit more advanced. There's companies like Irvin out there who are basically building personalized Bloomberg terminals for retail investors. And they're open to all different types of investments. I think we focus primarily on public company investments, public equities, but you're seeing a surge in alternative investments. You're seeing folks use different types of investment vehicles like options and futures. You're also seeing investment in the private markets as well. And with this landscape only growing and expanding, I think there's two things that are happening. So, one, the investors themselves are they're getting more sophisticated, but I think they're also learning. So if you go back to the stat, and this is an eToro stat, 49% of investors have invested for 5 years, you know that they've only been through a limited number of cycles, if they've been through a full cycle at all. And they're learning and taking those lessons as they potentially retrench or they apply different strategies or they explore different types of investments. So I think that's one big thing. And then number two, you're seeing the companies themselves lean in and engage more directly. And again, we think about public equities, but you're seeing this on the private side as well. You're seeing platforms like Republic, like Start Engine, like Fundify build relationships between private companies and their shareholders. And oftentimes that's the tip of the spear. That's where you're seeing the innovation happen, where companies realize that they have these true believers in their companies. A lot of these customers are already making investments in different types of private companies or public companies or alternatives. So they come to the decision that they can build a really deep connection with these individuals as investors and shareholders as well as customers. And so those two dynamics, I think, are really driving a lot of change. I think we're still in the early innings, and the next few months and the next few years, we're going to see a lot of development and evolution in those relationships, but things are changing quickly. And with the new generation of investors, companies that get ahead of it are going to be in a strategically better place and be able to leverage the power of retail investors to their advantage and not be on the back heels reacting and in a potentially precarious position.
I like how you bifurcated the two kind of themes that you're seeing there in terms of how retail investment behavior is evolving and what's supporting those changes. So, one thing that you touched on that resonated with some of my discussions with IR programs and IR professionals, it seems like impact investing has had a groundswell.
Sure.
And I think this is especially true when we look at Gen Zers, how they spend their time, how they spend their money, and you talk about how a company can get ahead of this. What would you recommend a company do to help influence the retail investors' decisions to buy or sell their own stock?
When dealing with this next generation of investors, you're looking at millennial and Gen Z, and they have a strong BS detector. They want companies to be direct with them, they want them to be authentic. And when you come to them with waffly claims or statements, they're going to call you out. And we see this on the consumer side, but we're seeing it more and more on the shareholder side as well. And so a huge piece of this is bringing your authentic voice directly and transparently to this new generation of shareholders. And what that does is it allows them to A, buy into the message, and then B, really look at long term how they're aligned. And they will be the community that is defending these corporate decisions and advocating for the respective company because you built up that relationship in the beginning. Companies that are going into these types of decisions or how much they want to lean in, they really need to look at themselves in the mirror and determine whether it's an authentic play. Does it relate directly to their business? Is it something that their customers care about? Is it something that their shareholders care about? And I think if there's alignment, that can be really powerful. I think if there's not alignment, that's where you get a lot of the pushback. In general, I think because of the digitization, the technology, and the tools, you're seeing these things again move faster than ever. And that sometimes can be scary for an IR team. But if you've done the legwork to be direct, to be transparent, to speak to this community of shareholders or potential shareholders, you're going to be in such a better place. And they're going to be the ones there that are defending these decisions and advocating for the plays that a company has made because they were a part of the conversation from the beginning. They've seen why you're doing it, and they will be the ones that are long term and that are thinking about these bigger bets and why they're important to a specific company. And again, relative to that company, not just checking a box, but something that is strategically vital to the long term growth and equity creation of a company.
I think that point that you touched on is kind of a flash point when we talk about the ESG related metrics or transparency. There's a lot of greenwashing happening right now, hoping to capture the money that is being thrown towards impact investing or sustainability investing. But to your point, when we look at how a good sustainability strategy or a good risk mitigation strategy, I would call it, it
Sure.
is at play and it's transparent and it's given to their shareholders, a company actually performs better. They are on a path to profitability.
Mm,
And one thing that I read in this research co-authored by Wharton, Yale, and Stanford, they said that they find that retail investors care a lot about the firm's ESG related activities, which we know, but mainly whether they affect the value of their investments or not. So they're still looking for alpha
sure.
and sustainability transparency, right? So it's not that they're just throwing money at people or companies that say, yes, we're sustainable and we're green, but they're really doing their research and their legwork. It's their money and they want to make sure that they're making returns here. And so I thought that was interesting that you touched on that as well.
I think you hit the nail on the head that, again, going back to the earlier point, a lot of these investors are savvier than they get credit for. They are looking for their own alpha and they're making bets. And a lot of the ESG conversations, what's being missed is they're actually looking at that as an alpha strategy and applying that to the bets that they're making. They fundamentally believe that companies that lean into this direction, again, relative to who they are as a business, can be long term a very strong and sound strategy. I know I'm going to just continue to be a broken record on this topic, but part of it is retail gets lumped together and there is broad headlines about retail when, again, they come in all different makeups and strategies and types of people. The other piece is getting even more local in how you treat retail, is looking at your own retail shareholders. What do they care about? And most publicly traded companies, A, don't know who their retail shareholders are. And then B, they don't have that feedback loop where they're actually hearing from them. What do they care about? And relative to their position in the company, what is important to them? That's what we're trying to help companies do. But I think that is a good starting point to understand through a retail shareholder lens what is important to these individual shareholders and why is that important to them? And then applying a strategy on top of that. There's a company called Iconic. It's doing some amazing work out there, helping retail shareholders develop voting strategies in proxy situations based on what they believe is long term sustainable for the companies that they're investing in. And I think that feedback loop would be so important to companies to know ahead of time what is important to our 20, 30% of our shareholder base, and getting that real time and understanding why they believe something is important to a company and their long-term growth prospects and their long-term success.
You actually answered my next question here. I was going to talk a little bit
I'm jumping
about
ahead.
yeah, you're jumping ahead of the retail investor participation and shareholder and voting. I was going to ask, do they even matter? But you answered that. Yes, they absolutely matter. There are companies out there now that are helping educate, inform, and help them with shareholder voting on proxy matters. So that's interesting.
Yeah. Only thing I'd add on top of that is you're seeing a lot of startups in the space that are building exciting tools. Those are coming from the ecosystem. Those are also coming from the brokerages. So you're seeing companies like Say Technologies that Robinhood had acquired a few years ago really help companies build more of those direct relationships to their shareholders. Public.com put out a product called Pulse, I think a year ago, where they're helping with that investor communication. And a big piece of that is voting. And we believe that you'll start to see more of that coming out of the ecosystem and coming out of the brokerages as well, because it's that feedback loop. They're speaking with their votes. More of this next generation of shareholders are starting to understand how to participate and how to make their voices heard. That's a huge opportunity for companies that lean in. They can build that community ahead of time, and they can also have some idea of what their shareholders care about, what direction they're going to vote in. And strategically, when they're in a challenging proxy situation, that can be invaluable, but they have to do the legwork ahead of time.
I would like to close the podcast with just one more question. What is the number one actionable piece of advice that you would give IR professionals when it comes to managing and communicating with retail investors?
It's a great question. It's a question we get a lot. We were at the Neary National event last year, had a lot of IROs coming up to us asking a similar question. I was at the IR Magazine think tank in San Francisco a few weeks ago. I think asking the question is often the first step. We're not the only company in the industry that's helping push companies towards a retail strategy that really works. So I think there's a lot of us that pick up the phone. A lot of us are willing to just give a 101 on the retail market. We're willing to help handhold and show these IROs what's possible. And then lastly, I'd say our framework on our end, it's really identify, engage, and measure. So you can't do a lot until you start to identify who your retail shareholders are, what do they care about, and then you can build an engagement strategy on top of that. And lastly, you start to measure what are the results? Is this driving long-term behaviors? Is this driving participation in proxy situations? Is this driving advocacy from our shareholders? Is this creating healthy long-term shareholders? You see companies out there that are doing it well, companies like Netflix, companies like Bolero, Carnival Cruise, and the cruise lines have had programs like this for a while. Coinbase went directly to their shareholders on Reddit. Airbnb brought their hosts into the equity equation when they IPO'd. There's a lot of folks out there. We just worked with a company called Selena, who pulled together an amazing shareholder program where they were connecting the dots between their customers and shareholders. So I think just ask the question. If you're asking the question, you're on the right track. Talk to folks like us at Stakeholder Labs. I'll give a shout out. Stock Perks, Ticker, Bits of Stock, a few others in the industry that are also trying to build tools for the ecosystem and help companies lean into this opportunity. And again, you got to identify, you got to engage, and you got to measure. That's going to be your playbook and really help start that process. Carmen, it's been fantastic chatting with you. Always enjoy connecting with you and your team. Appreciate what you guys are doing. You guys are really bringing a dose of innovation and cutting edge thinking to this industry. You're just such an important part of the ecosystem. Thank you. And looking forward to the next time we chat.
We always appreciate that. Thank you for joining us. It was a pleasure to have your unique perspectives and insights on retail investors. I hope our listeners gained actionable insights on shareholder composition and communication in order to better engage with retail investors. If you like this content, please subscribe. And until next month.